14 people and $40 million in equity documents filled the conference room when I walked in. My wife Meredith's hand froze over her pen. Her father Hugh stopped mid-sentence. Her mother Constance looked at me the way she always did, like something that didn't belong. I set the leather binder on the mahogany table and opened to page 47. 8 signatures, all mine, all fake. Before anyone signs, I said, you should see what your equity is built on. Before the revenge unfolds, tap subscribe and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Thank you for being here. My name is Ian Braddock. I am 44 years old, and I build furniture for a living. Before that, I spent 12 years at Deloitte's Forensic Accounting Division tracing stolen money through shell companies for the federal government. People tend to remember only the second part, if they remember anything about me at all. But the first thing I ever learned to build was a house. My father was a general contractor in Ridgefield, Connecticut. Not a developer, not a project manager who subcontracted every task and collected margins. A builder. He framed walls, hung doors, milled crown molding on a shaper table in the garage workshop attached to our home. The house I grew up in, a 2-story colonial on a half-acre lot with original plaster walls and a wraparound porch, he built with his own hands over 3 summers. Every joint fitted, every board measured. Every nail driven by a man who believed the only honest test of work was whether it stood on its own. I was 8 the first time he brought me into the workshop. He set a piece of red oak on the bench and ran my hand across the surface. "Feel that?" he said. "The grain runs this direction. You don't force the wood. It tells you where the joint goes." I picked up a scrap piece and tried to run my fingers along it the way he had. "Too fast," he said. "Slow down. Let your hand listen." I didn't understand. Not at 8. But I watched his hands move over that oak, reading the grain the way other men read blueprints. No hesitation, no wasted motion. He died of a heart attack at 58. Shoveling gravel for a client's driveway on a Tuesday morning in March. My mother Ruth, a school secretary who'd spent 30 years raising me and keeping the house running, found him at noon when she brought his lunch. Face down in the gravel, shovel still in his hand. I was 26. Old enough to understand what I'd lost. Young enough to think I could make up for it by working harder. His workshop sat empty for 2 years. I couldn't bring myself to touch his tools. Ruth stayed in the house. Her husband had built it for her, and every room held something his hands had shaped. Built-in bookshelves in the living room. A kitchen island from reclaimed barn wood. Crown molding he'd milled himself in the garage. The wraparound porch where she sat every evening with her coffee, watching neighbors walk past. She carried the original brass key on her ring, the one my father had cut when he finished the front door. She would never give that key up. Not for money, not for anyone. "This house doesn't need a new owner," she told me the week after the funeral. "It just needs someone to look after it." I'd started night school 2 years before he died, putting myself through accounting while working construction during the day. 4 years total. Pouring concrete at 7 in the morning and reading tax code at 10 at night. I earned my CP, a certification, then my CFE certified fraud examiner. A credential most people have never heard of and fewer understand. Deloitte hired me into their forensic accounting division, where I spent the next 12 years tracing laundered funds through corporate shell company networks. Federal fraud cases. The work was systematic. Start at the known endpoint, the depleted account, and trace every dollar backward to its origin, then forward to its destination, entity by entity, transfer by transfer, until the whole structure was exposed. I was good at it, the kind of good that doesn't draw attention. I never testified in dramatic courtroom scenes. I sat in conference rooms with FBI agents and federal prosecutors, sliding spreadsheets across tables and explaining where the money had gone and whose names were on the paperwork. One case, I tracked a single transaction chain through 17 nested entities across 4 states. 3 weeks on one trail, every dollar accounted for. Prosecutors asked for me by name on 3 consecutive cases. Nobody at a dinner party wanted to hear about any of it. I met my future wife, Meredith Ashworth, at a charity gala her family sponsored in Greenwich. A piano played near the windows. Waiters circulated with champagne on silver trays. She was standing near the bar, talking to no one. Everyone else in the room moved in clusters, performing for each other. She stood alone, holding champagne she hadn't touched, watching the crowd. She was 27. Honey blonde hair at her shoulders, high cheekbones, pale blue eyes that locked onto mine when I introduced myself. "Forensic accounting," she repeated when I told her what I did. "So you're the person who finds where the money went." "That's the short version. What's the long version?" "I find where it went, who moved it, how they hid it, and why they thought nobody would notice." "That's dark," she said. "It's arithmetic," she laughed. Not the polished laugh I'd heard from every other woman at that gala. Head tipped back, champagne sloshing in her glass. "I like you," she said. "You could ruin half the people in this room and they'd never see it coming." I should have paid closer attention to what she found attractive about that. We dated for 14 months. Long dinners where she asked real questions about my cases and remembered the answers weeks later. She wanted to know how shell companies worked, how people moved money through layers of corporate entities without getting caught. Her interest in the mechanics of financial crime seemed honest. I answered questions I wouldn't have answered for anyone else. Her family was another matter. Her father, Hugh, ran the Ashworth Development Group, a real estate operation that had put the family name on commercial projects across Fairfield County for 3 generations. Her mother, Constance, a former trust fund attorney who now ran the family through guilt and social pressure, was silver-haired, the kind of woman who ended conversations by looking away. They lived in a 7-bedroom Georgian colonial on 4 acres in Greenwich, with boxwood hedges trimmed to military precision and a circular gravel drive. My Deloitte career made me acceptable to the Ashworths. Not welcome, acceptable. We married when Meredith was 29. She wore her grandmother's pearl necklace at the ceremony, a single strand she never took off after that day. The early years were Sunday mornings with the crossword split between us, her reading the clues aloud while I filled in answers. Takeout on the kitchen floor, because we hadn't bought a dining table yet. Small things that cost nothing and meant everything. I earned the income. Meredith managed the household finances from day one, and I let her. She paid the bills, tracked statements, handled transfers between accounts. I reviewed quarterly summaries and signed where she pointed. She was organized. She kept records. I had no reason to question any of it. Together, we built a joint portfolio worth $1.1 million across 3 First Republic accounts: checking, savings, and a brokerage account that held my father's inheritance. $280,000 in index funds, the only financial legacy he ever left. Every dollar of it converted from years of shoveling gravel and framing walls and driving nails in Connecticut winters. "I've got the accounts handled," Meredith told me once when I mentioned checking the brokerage balance. "You worry about your cases." I didn't push it. I trusted her. Not from laziness, from belief. The woman who'd laughed at that gala, who'd called me dangerous, who'd chosen me over every polished name her parents would have preferred. I believed she was still that person. At 40, I left Deloitte. The decision took 2 years to form and 5 minutes to explain. I wanted to build things with my hands, the way my father had. I rented a cottage near Ruth's house, converted the attached 2-car garage into a workshop, and opened Braddock Woodworking. The shop became my life. Saw-stop tables saw against the back wall. Lie-Nielsen hand planes arranged by size on a magnetic strip. Racks of air-drying hardwood along both sides. The air smelled of walnut oil and fresh sawdust. I built dining tables, bookcases, bed frames, pieces with hand-cut joinery that would last longer than the people who used them. Clients found me through word of mouth across Ridgefield and beyond. A loyal base grew 1 commission at a time. I made less money than I had at Deloitte. I slept better. In the 2nd year, I started building guitars. Acoustic instruments from reclaimed wood, each named after the tree species it came from. Maple was first, a dreadnought with a bright, open voice. Then walnut, darker and heavier. Then ash, with a tight grain that produced a tone I hadn't expected. Then rosewood, built from Brazilian stock a client's widow had given me after her husband's shop closed. Each instrument took 8 to 12 months. Selecting the wood, bending the sides over a hot pipe, carving the bracing by hand. 4 guitars in 2 years, some builds overlapping on the bench. I could play none of them beyond a few open chords. G, C, D, campfire strumming that did nothing for instruments built to produce concert-level sound. But playing was never the point. I built them for the engineering. Shaping a hollow body so that every vibration traveled through the bracing and the bridge and came out the other side as something close to perfect resonance. My father read wood grain with his fingertips. I chased sound through it. The 5th guitar sat clamped on my center bench. Body shaped and braced, neck rough-cut, fretboard waiting. The wood was American chestnut, salvaged from an 1890s barn in Litchfield County. The species had been wiped out by blight before 1950. The wood could not be bought, could not be replaced. It could only be built into something worth the 130 years it had already survived. The Ashworths saw my career change differently. "So it's a hobby," Constance said at Sunday dinner without looking up from her plate. 14 seats around the formal dining table, crystal chandelier above, oil portraits of 3 generations of Ashworth men watching from the walls. I sat at the far end, where I always sat. "It's a business," I said. "Of course it is." She cut her fillet and changed the subject to the Stamford zoning variants. Hugh stopped acknowledging me after that. At family dinners, he discussed land acquisitions, construction timelines, investor meetings, talked across me, around me, through me, as though my end of the table was empty. Not hostile, just vacant. The way you stop noticing a piece of furniture you walk past every day. "The Langley Group is offering full anchor tenancy," he said to Constance one Sunday. "That changes the pro forma on the entire project." I sat 3 seats away. He never looked in my direction. Meredith changed too, though it came in degrees so small I marked them only in retrospect. She stopped visiting the shop on weekends, stopped asking what I was building, started correcting my behavior at her parents' table. "The knife goes on the right side of the plate, Ian," she said at one dinner. Not to me, to the table, so her mother could hear. I moved the knife. I told myself it was temporary. The adjustment to my new career, the pressure from her parents, the natural friction of 2 people recalibrating. I told myself a lot of things that year. The woman who had laughed at the gala, who had chosen me over every name her parents preferred, was gone. In her place sat someone polished and distant, present at meals, absent everywhere else. To the Ashworth family, I had become what I built: functional, forgettable, easy to replace when something better came along. The dinners kept their shape. Every Sunday, the circular gravel drive, the boxwood hedges, the 14 chairs, the chandelier throwing cold light across bone china and silver flatware. The portraits of Ashworth men watched from the walls. Nothing changed except the effort the family put into pretending I belonged at that table. Each month, there was less of it. 6 months after I'd opened the shop, Constance set her wineglass down and looked at me from the far end. "Ian, I ran into Margaret Hensley this week. Her son-in-law just made partner at Sullivan and Cromwell." She let the name sit. "When do you plan on getting back to real work?" Meredith cut a piece of asparagus in half without looking up. "Mother, it's a fair question, darling. A man with his credentials sitting in a garage all day." Constance smiled at Meredith, not at me. A private smile, shared between 2 people who'd already discussed me in a room I was never invited into. "The shop is doing well," I said. "I'm sure it is." She lifted her glass and turned to Hugh. "How is the Stamford timeline?" The question had never been about an answer. It was about positioning, reminding everyone at the table, including me, that I'd stepped down from a career these people could respect and into one they could not. By the 2nd year, Meredith's corrections had become reflexive. Which fork? Which glass? Where to rest my hands between courses? "Salad fork, Ian," she said one Sunday, reaching across and repositioning my hand without pausing her conversation with Constance. The gesture carried the patience reserved for someone else's child. I picked up the right fork. Hugh ran Ashworth business at the table, the way he ran it everywhere. Not with volume, with mass. He was gaunt and 71, and discussed zoning variances and investor commitments the way other men discussed weather. His voice carried to every chair except mine. "Gregory is reviewing the Stamford variance appeal," Hugh said to Constance one evening. Gregory Travers, the Ashworth family attorney for 2 decades, sat 4 chairs from me. 55, steel-rimmed glasses. A charcoal suit that cost more than my monthly rent. He clicked his pen against the table edge between sentences. "And the waterfront anchor?" Constance asked. "Carter Langley confirmed. Full ground floor retail plus marina access. The numbers are strong." They talked through dessert. Gregory clicked his pen twice and added something about easement language. Nobody looked at my end of the table. On the drive home, Meredith stared out the passenger window. The radio played jazz. At a stoplight, I watched her reflection in the glass. "Good dinner," I said. The financial controls started with paper, or the absence of it. "I'm switching our statements to paperless," Meredith told me one Tuesday evening. She sat at the desk in our home office, laptop open. "Reduces clutter. Everything's backed up digitally." I was sanding a drawer face at the kitchen table, hands dusted with walnut shavings. Fine. The paper statement stopped. 3 accounts: checking, savings, and the brokerage holding my father's $280,000 inheritance in index funds. All of them now accessible only through online portals Meredith administered. A month later, she changed the passwords on every account. "There was a data breach at Coastal Savings," she told me. All over the financial news. I updated our login credentials. "What are the new ones?" "I'll write them down for you." She didn't. When I asked again 2 weeks later, she said she'd email them. The email never came. I could have driven to the First Republic branch on Main Street, shown my ID, reset everything in 20 minutes. But I didn't, because this was Meredith, the woman who'd managed our finances since day one with the same control my father brought to a build site. I'd never had reason to question her. I let it go. Carter Langley entered our life as a name on a deal sheet before he became anything else. A waterfront real estate developer from Stamford, late 40s, whose development group held the anchor tenancy that would make the Ashworth's $40 million project viable. Meredith mentioned him the way she mentioned every business contact. As a function of her parents' ambition. "Carter's restructuring the waterfront bid," she said over breakfast one morning, eyes on her phone. "Mother needs the retail commitment locked before Q3. First name, not Mr. Langley or the developer. Carter." She started working later, Thursday evenings, at her parents' house, reviewing project documents with Constance. Saturday lunches, I wasn't told about until after. New clothes appearing in the closet without comment. A different perfume I didn't recognize. Small changes. I registered the way I'd register a creak in the floor at night. Noted, filed, not investigated. I saw fragments. I didn't build the picture. Not then, but in those months, I was building a white oak bookcase for a client in Westport and didn't see any of what was forming behind the walls of my own life. What I didn't see was happening in Wilmington, Delaware. Constance Ashworth had practiced trust law before deciding that Ashworth women managed legacy, not other people's paperwork. She understood corporate structures the way I understood wood grain. 11 months after I opened my shop, she filed the first LLC formation document. Ashworth Coastal Holdings, LLC, registered in Delaware, where corporate anonymity is the product, not a side effect. Organizing member, Constance Ashworth. Registered agent, Hugh Ashworth. Mailing address, a Wilmington office suite leased by the Ashworth's accountant. 3 more entities followed over the next 7 months. Tidewater Equity Partners, LLC. Meridian Capital Ventures, LLC. And the last one, the one that would connect everything, Langley Ashworth Associates, LLC. 4 shells, each one a container designed to receive money from one direction and route it in another without leaving a trail readable to anyone who wasn't trained to look. Nobody was looking. The transfers began 6 weeks after the first LLC was formed. two channels running in parallel. The first was structuring. Small movements between the checking and savings accounts. 2,000 here, 4,000 there. Never more than 8,000 at a time. Each one kept below the reporting threshold that triggers automated compliance flags at financial institutions. 37 transfers over 18 months, disguised as routine account activity. The second channel ran through the brokerage. Larger amounts hidden inside portfolio activity. Shares liquidated and proceeds wired to the LLCS as advisory fees, management costs, capital calls. 20,000 in one quarter, 40,000 in the next. Each transaction wrapped in the language of professional asset management, the kind of line items that blend into quarterly statements like background noise. The joint accounts bled. $1.1 million, past 900,000, past 750, past 500, past 300. The structuring drained checking and savings a few thousand at a time. The brokerage manipulation took the rest, including my father's $280,000 inheritance, in larger bites disguised as market corrections. Together, they took everything. Every dollar I'd earned, saved, and compounded. All of it moving through 4 Delaware LLCS and out the other side into the equity structure of a waterfront development that carried the Ashworth name and no trace of mine. The loan happened on a Tuesday in October. I know the day because my mother Ruth mentioned it when she called me 3 weeks after the fact. Her voice carried the uncertain tone of someone who wasn't sure she'd done the right thing, but had already done it. Meredith came by with some paperwork, she said. A home equity loan. She said you two needed it for some investments. I set down the plane I'd been sharpening. A home equity loan. On your house. She said your joint assets back it up. Over $800,000. She had all the documentation right there. How much is the loan? $175,000. $175,000. Against the house my father built. The house with the original plaster walls and the wraparound porch he'd framed himself and the kitchen island he'd milled from reclaimed barn wood. The house Ruth would never leave. The house with the brass key still on her ring, the one my father cut when he finished the front door. Meredith had driven to Ridgefield that morning. Past our cottage, past my shop, straight to my mother's house on the hill. The kitchen smelled like coffee and dish soap. It always did. She'd sat at Ruth's kitchen table and spread the documents and explained the terms with the calm authority that had always made people trust her. The loan officer was very helpful, Ruth said. Said it was straightforward given the documentation Meredith provided. Which bank, she named a regional institution where the Ashworths kept their commercial accounts. Where the family name carried weight that bypassed the kind of independent verification a $175,000 home equity loan should have required. The loan officer accepted Meredith's documentation without checking a single number against a source she didn't control. She sat right at the kitchen table, Ruth said. Your father's table explained everything. My mother's arthritic hands, signing documents at a table her dead husband built 40 years ago. Trusting her daughter-in-law because there had never been a reason not to. I'm sure it's fine, Ian, Ruth said. Meredith knows what she's doing. Yeah, I said, I'm sure she does. I checked the savings balance that weekend. Not a full audit. A glance at the quarterly summary Meredith left on the home office desk. The number was lower than it should have been, not catastrophically low, just off. The way a measurement reads wrong when someone has been moving the reference point between readings. The brokerage rebalanced last quarter, Meredith said when I mentioned it. She stood in the growing room, misting orchid leaves with a brass sprayer, 60 specimens arranged on climate-controlled shelves. The advisor shifted some positions into bonds. It's all in the portfolio allocation summary. She produced a printed summary the next day. Balances, percentages, market adjustments. The numbers looked reasonable. I scanned them between sanding sessions and set the paper aside. 2 months later, I asked again. Not because the math was wrong, because something behind my ribs kept pulling. The instinct I'd relied on at Deloitte, the one that fired when a shell company's revenue didn't match its reported headcount. A question without evidence. A door I hadn't opened. I'd like to see the brokerage statements, I said. The monthly ones from First Republic. Not the summary you prepare. Meredith stood at the kitchen counter, phone in hand. She set it face down on the granite. Her right hand rose to her throat, and her fingers closed around her grandmother's pearl necklace. I'd learned that gesture years ago, the fingers on the pearls. Ian, her voice dropped half a register. I handle the finances. I've handled them since the day we married. If you want to spend your evenings auditing my work while your little tables pile up in the garage, that's your choice. But let me do what I do. I always have. Your little tables. I looked at her hand on the pearls, at her eyes, the expression she kept for people who questioned her numbers. At the phone turned face down on the counter. Okay, I said. I walked back to the shop. The Chestnut Guitar sat clamped on the center bench, top plate off, fretboard rough cut. I picked up a scrap of red oak and ran my fingers along the grain. The wood tells you where the joint goes. You don't force it. My father's voice, 36 years gone, still the clearest sound in the room. The shell companies kept receiving transfers. Dollars I never authorized moving through accounts I could no longer access, routing my father's inheritance through Delaware into a future that had never been designed to include me. The call came on a Wednesday morning. I was fitting a mortise joint on a client's dining table when my phone buzzed on the workbench. We need to talk about our future. Meredith's voice carried the flat quality of something rehearsed. No greeting, no warmth. Can you come to my parents' house this afternoon? 3 o'clock. Why your parents' house? It's important, Ian. Please, just come. I wiped sawdust from my hands and looked at the clock above the shop door. 10,004. I'll be there, I said. She hung up without another word. I drove to Greenwich at 2:30, taking Route 7 south through October Hills. The trees along the Merritt Parkway had started turning, red and amber against a gray sky. I thought about what our future meant in the voice she'd used. Nothing good, but I expected a conversation. 2 adults working through what had gone wrong. That was what normal marriages produced when they ended. Conversations. The circular gravel drive held cars I didn't expect. Meredith's white Range Rover, which should have been at our house in Ridgefield. And next to it, Gregory Travers's charcoal BMW with its Connecticut Bar Association plate frame. The family attorney doesn't attend a marital conversation. He attends a legal proceeding. I parked my truck at the end of the row, next to the boxwood hedge. A 10-year-old Ford among European sedans. I rang the bell. No answer. Tried the door. Open. The foyer smelled of furniture polish and cold stone. Voices carried from the dining room, low and controlled. The cadence of people reviewing documents. Not arguing. Organizing. I walked through the archway and stopped. 4 people sat at the mahogany table where I'd spent 12 years of Sunday dinners. Meredith, on the near side, dressed in camel and cream, pearl necklace against her collarbone. Constance at the head, silver hair pulled back, reading glasses folded beside her water glass. Hugh to her left, gaunt and erect, both hands flat on the wood. Gregory across from Meredith, steel-rimmed glasses catching the chandelier light, a stack of legal documents squared in front of him with colored tabs marking signature pages. No chair pulled out for me, no coffee, no pretense of a family gathering. The oil portraits watched from the walls. The chandelier threw cold light across the mahogany. Everything in the room had been arranged before I arrived. "Ian," Meredith gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit down, please." I pulled out the chair and sat. The wood creaked under my weight. Nobody spoke while I looked at the documents, at the colored tabs, at the 4 faces watching me with the coordinated patience of people who had rehearsed this meeting without me. Gregory uncapped his Mont Blanc, black enamel and gold trim, and placed it beside the document stack. Then he slid the top folder across the mahogany toward me. The tab read Marital Dissolution Agreement in printed capitals. "We've prepared a settlement," he said. "No contest divorce. Clean separation of assets. Both parties walk away without the expense of litigation." I opened the folder. 36 pages. Legal language packed tight enough to discourage reading. I turned to the summary in section 4.2. The number sat in bold type. $50,000. Lump sum. Payable upon execution. In exchange, full waiver of claims to marital property. No alimony. No future right of asset discovery. No challenge to the financial disclosures accompanying the agreement. "This is a fair resolution, Ian," Gregory said. He rested both hands on the table, fingers interlaced. "Given the current financial picture, $50,000 represents a meaningful share of distributable assets." $50,000. For 12 years of marriage. For every paycheck I'd earned, every dollar saved and compounded, every quarter of my father's inheritance sitting in index funds. They'd put a price on all of it, and the price was $50,000. "I'd like to see the financial disclosures," I said. Gregory produced a second folder without hesitation. Pre-staged. He'd had it ready before I asked, positioned beneath the agreement like the next card in a dealt hand. Inside, 3 account summaries from First Republic Bank. Checking, $12,400. Savings, $18,200. Brokerage, $16,400. Total across all 3 accounts, $47,000. 14 months ago, those accounts held $1.1 million. I placed the disclosures on the table, kept my hands flat beside them. Where did the rest go? The room tightened. Not in any way a camera would catch. Constance picked up her water glass. Hugh's jaw moved a quarter inch to the left. Gregory's pen hand drifted toward the Mont Blanc. 3 separate tells, all firing inside the same second. Meredith's right hand rose to her throat. Her fingers found the pearl necklace and closed around a single bead. The tell I'd catalogued years ago. The one that preceded something cruel. "The markets have been difficult," she said. We discussed the portfolio adjustments. Multiple times. Ian, you know this. The markets didn't take $1 million out of 3 accounts in 18 months, I said. There were rebalancing costs, advisory fees, positions that performed below projections. She kept her fingers on the pearls. It's all documented in the allocation reports. I haven't seen an allocation report in 2 years, I said. You changed the passwords. For security reasons. Ian, we've been over this. Then tell me which positions lost money, what the advisory fees totaled, where the rebalancing transfers were sent. Constance set her water glass on the mahogany. The base hit the wood with a controlled click. Ian, the money went to investments. Family business. She looked at me the way she'd looked at me for 12 years of Sunday dinners. Nothing that concerns you. Nothing that concerns you, said to the man whose name was on every account, whose social security number backed every transfer authorization, whose signature, or something that resembled it, must have appeared on every outbound wire. The disclosures comply with all statutory requirements under Connecticut marital dissolution law, Gregory said. His pen clicked against the table edge. I'm happy to walk you through the summary if... I've read them, I said. The pen clicked again, twice. I knew what I was looking at. Not the details, not the mechanism. Not yet, but the shape of it. At Deloitte, we had a working term for this kind of documentation. Presentation package. What you built when you needed someone to sign without asking questions. Clean documents. Round numbers. A summary page designed to answer the one question you wanted asked while making the 20 questions you didn't seem unnecessary. I'd spent 12 years reviewing documents like these for federal prosecutors. The indicators were the same, whether the fraud was $10,000 or $10 million. The vague answers, investments, family business, language chosen because it meant nothing specific, and specificity left evidence trails. Pre-stage disclosures produced the instant I asked, which meant they'd anticipated the question and constructed the response before I walked through the door. And the lump sum itself calibrated to a psychology, large enough to look generous to someone they believed was broken, small enough to be trivial against whatever they'd moved. Constance straightened in her chair. Let me be plain, Ian. $50,000 is more than generous for a man who builds tables. She said it without anger, without heat. With the absence of regard she'd shown me for 12 years, now reduced to its purest form. Hugh cleared his throat, but added nothing. His shoulders held the rigid posture of a man waiting for a transaction to finalize. You should be grateful, Ian, Meredith said. Her eyes held mine, pale blue, unblinking. This is more than fair given the circumstances. More than fair, Constance echoed. I looked at the Mont Blanc pen Gregory had placed beside the agreement, the kind of pen that comes with its own leather case. If the disclosures were honest, $50,000 was everything I'd walk away with. If they weren't, and every signal I'd been trained to read said they weren't, my mother's house was collateral for money that had been moved somewhere these 4 people didn't want me looking. The rule at Deloitte was simple. When you suspect coordinated fraud, you don't confront. You don't accuse. You don't reveal what you know or what you're assembling. You collect. You document. And above all, you let the other side believe they've won. People who think they've won stop covering their tracks. I picked up the pen, heavier than it looked. I opened the agreement to the first signature tab and wrote my name, Ian Mere Braddock. Not a scan, not a digital paste. My actual hand, my actual signature on their document. Second tab, signed. Third, the nib scratched across the signature line. Heavy paper, the kind that absorbs ink without bleeding. Fourth, fifth, sixth, and last. 6 signatures placed with the same unhurried hand I'd used to trace transaction chains through 17 layered corporate entities. No hesitation, no questions. Gregory watched my pen move across each page with the attention of a man counting down to 0. When I signed the last tab, his Mont Blanc clicked against the table. Once. Relief. Hugh's shoulders dropped 2 inches, the stiffness he'd carried through the entire meeting releasing at once. Meredith's hand left the pearls and came to rest in her lap. They looked at each other, Constance to Hugh, Hugh to Gregory, Gregory to Meredith. Constance's mouth drew into something that was not quite a smile. Close enough. The quiet man who built furniture in a garage had done what quiet men do. Signed where they pointed, took what he was given, walked away. I set the pen down. Gregory will have the check prepared by Friday, Meredith said. The rehearsed neutrality was gone from her voice. What replaced it was something lighter. The sound of someone closing a file. I'll take it now, I said. A beat. Gregory opened a drawer beneath the table and produced a cashier's check. Pre-cut. Predated. They'd had it ready before I walked through the door. Ready before Meredith made the call that morning. I took the check, folded it once, and put it in my jacket pocket. Stood. Pushed the chair in. Thank you for your time, I said. Nobody answered. I walked through the foyer, past the family photographs on the wall, through the front door, down the stone steps to the gravel. My boots crunched across the stones. October air carried the smell of turning leaves and cold earth. I got in my truck and pulled the door shut. The Georgian Colonial filled the rear view, boxwood hedges, European sedans, chandelier light through tall windows. $50,000 in my jacket. Someone had moved over $1 million out of accounts with my name on them, and I never authorized a single transfer. The disclosures showed $47,000 where $1.1 million should have been. And they'd cut the check before I arrived, which meant they never once considered the possibility that I'd do anything except sign, cash it, and disappear. If the numbers underneath those pages were lies, every signature I'd just placed was worthless. Connecticut law made sure of that. I turned the key and pulled out of the circular drive. North toward Ridgefield, toward the cottage, toward the shop where the Chestnut Guitar sat clamped on the center bench, unfinished, waiting. They thought I signed because I'd given up. I signed because I needed them to stop watching. The settlement check sat on the kitchen counter where I'd left it the night before. I drove to First Republic's Ridgefield branch with my driver's license and Social Security card. Patricia, the branch manager who'd handled my mother's accounts for 15 years, printed 3 years of statements across all 3 joint accounts without asking why. Tax filing review, I told her when she taped the box shut. She nodded. The box weighed 11 pounds. I know because I set it on the shop scale before carrying it to the kitchen. I cleared the table, pushed aside walnut shavings, sandpaper grits, a cold mug of coffee with sawdust floating on the surface, covered the wood with butcher paper, Laid the first 12 months of statements left to right. Checking on the left. Savings in the center. Brokerage on the right. 3 highlighters uncapped beside the stapler. Green for deposits I recognized. Red for transfers I didn't. Yellow for anything that needed a second look. Start with the end point, $47,000, where $1.1 million should be. Trace every dollar backward to its origin, then forward to its destination. Entity by entity. Transfer by transfer. The same framework I'd applied at Deloitte for 12 years of federal fraud work. The difference was that these accounts carried my Social Security number, and the missing money had been used to leverage my mother's house. The Chestnut Guitar sat clamped on the center bench in the shop, visible through the kitchen window. I hadn't touched it since signing the settlement. The wood could wait. It had already waited 130 years. I started on a Monday. By Wednesday night, I hadn't left the cottage except to sleep. Day 1 through 3, every outbound transfer across all 3 accounts, 36 months, cataloged by hand on ruled paper. Date, amount, receiving institution, payee name, reference number. Each entry cross-checked against known household expenses, mortgage, utilities, insurance, credit cards, groceries, medical costs, shop material invoices. Anything that matched got a green line through it. 37 transfers matched nothing on the ledger. The checking and savings transfers confirmed what I'd suspected. Structured amounts, each kept below $8,000, calibrated to avoid automated compliance flags. The brokerage ran larger amounts through payees listed as advisory firms and capital consultants. I pulled every wire record and checked the receiving firms. No SEC registrations. No FINRA licenses. No physical addresses beyond mail forwarding services. But every wire cleared through the same correspondent bank in Wilmington, Delaware. My father's $280,000. 6 liquidation transactions across 8 months had reduced it to 0. Proceeds wired to entities that didn't exist. Routed through Delaware. Absorbed into a project that would carry the Ashworth name and no trace of his. On day 3, I opened the Delaware Division of Corporations website. The ISIS database stores public formation records for every LLC registered in the state. I entered the first payee name from my red-marked list. Ashworth Coastal Holdings, LLC, filed nearly 3 years before the divorce. Organizing member, Constance E. Ashworth. Registered agent, Hugh R. Ashworth. Mailing address, 1200 Market Street, Suite 414, Wilmington. An office suite I confirmed was leased by the Ashworth's accountant. All 4 matched. Same organizers, same agent, same Wilmington suite. Tidewater Equity Partners. Meridian Capital Ventures. Langley Ashworth Associates. I printed each formation document and pinned it to the butcher paper beside its matching bank record, connected with blue ink lines. I drove past my mother's house that night. Porch light on. The wraparound porch my father framed stood solid in the yellow glow. Through the kitchen window, I could see the table where Meredith had spread the loan documents. The chair where Ruth signed. The brass key was still on her ring. The $175,000 lien was still on her deed. Every dollar I traced made that lien heavier. By day 5, the kitchen table had vanished. statements in columned stacks, formation documents on the wall, a flowchart in blue ink mapping every dollar from our 3 accounts through 4 entities and into the equity structure of a $40 million waterfront deal. The money trail was complete. But trails alone don't prove fraud. My name was on those accounts. The transfer documents carried what appeared to be my signature. Without disproving the signatures, the Ashworths could claim I'd approved every wire. Donna Caldwell had worked the desk beside mine in Deloitte's forensic division for 8 years before leaving to start her own certified fraud examination practice in Norwalk. She operated from a shared office suite with 1 paralegal and 0 corporate entanglements. We hadn't spoken in 5 years. In forensic work, credibility outlasts conversation. "I need document analysis," I said when she answered on day 6. "Metadata extraction on 8 PDF files." Ian Braddock. A 3-second pause. "What kind of documents?" "Transfer authorizations from my joint bank accounts." "They carry my signature. I didn't sign them." The line went quiet. "Bring everything you have," she said. "Tomorrow after 2. Her office was on the 3rd floor above a sandwich shop in downtown Norwalk. Bankers' boxes stacked along every wall. Dual monitors on a desk buried under case files and reference manuals. Reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She plugged in the thumb drive I'd brought and pulled the first PDF onto her left screen without small talk. "These are the bank's retained copies?" she asked. "Scanned from their files. I requested them during the account review." She ran each document through EXIF tool on the right monitor. Creation timestamp, image resolution, color profile, compression data. By the 4th file, she stopped and pulled the reading glasses down. "Come look at this." I walked around the desk. All 8 documents open in a tiled view, metadata panels side by side. 8 columns of numbers that should have varied. They didn't. Every signature was a digital paste. Same source image. Someone had scanned one of my legitimate signatures, converted it to PNG with a transparent background, and overlaid it onto each form. 312 dpi on all 8. Identical pixel dimensions. JPEG compression artifacts around the signature edges. Same pattern, same radius, same density across every document. 1 scan, 8 pastes, not a single parameter changed. The color profiles locked it. Base documents ran sRGB color space, standard output from any bank document system. The pasted signatures were Adobe RGB. When you overlay Adobe RGB onto sRGB, the boundary pixels show a profile mismatch. Invisible on a printed page, but metadata records everything. She pulled up the creation timestamps. All 8 documents generated within a 14-minute window on a single Tuesday afternoon. They didn't even vary the rotation angle, Donna said. Every paste sits at 0 degrees. Your real signature tilts about 3 degrees right. I've seen it on enough Deloitte memos to know. She leaned back. This isn't careful work, Ian. Whoever made these assumed nobody with forensic training would ever open them. For 3 years, I said, they were right. I asked her to document the analysis formally. Comparison matrix, metadata extraction logs, full evidentiary chain. End of the week. I drove back to Ridgefield with Donna's preliminary findings printed on 6 pages and pinned them to the butcher paper wall. Then I sat down with the detail I'd flagged on day 4, and set aside. The fourth entity, Langley Ashworth Associates. The first three, LLCS, ran identical operating agreements. Constance as sole managing member. Hugh as registered agent. Standard distribution language. Clean, anonymous. Something in the fourth agreement was different. The operating structure included a Schedule K1 provision naming a secondary beneficiary entitled to 20% of all distributed profits. Carter Langley. Full legal name. Social Security number. 20% of every dollar that flowed through the fourth entity went to the waterfront developer whose anchor tenancy made the Ashworth project viable. The man whose first name, Meredith, used at the breakfast table. The man Hugh discussed at Sunday dinners while I sat at the far end of the table. I stared at the flowchart on the wall. 4 shells. 37 structured transfers. 8 forged signatures. Over $1 million routed from accounts bearing my name into a real estate project designed by 5 people for 5 people. Constance, Hugh, Meredith, Gregory, Carter. I was never the 6th. I was the source. The theft and the affair weren't separate betrayals. They were the same operation, running on the same money, built by the same hands. I drove to a legal supply store in Stamford the next morning. Bought a saddle brown leather portfolio binder with a brass zipper and a gold-stamped spine. $64. Back at the kitchen table, I organized 63 pages behind tab dividers. Tab 1, Joint Account Depletion. Timeline with 37 transfers, dates, and amounts. Tab 2, Delaware Formation Documents for all 4 Lee LCS. Organizing members and registered agents. Tab 3, Donna's metadata analysis showing 8 forged signatures generated from a single digital template. Tab 4, the fund tracing spreadsheet mapping each dollar from source account through shell company to final destination. Tab 5, property title chains connecting the shell network to the waterfront development's equity collateral. Tab 6, Carter Langley. Name, beneficiary status, distribution percentage. The last page. I zipped the binder shut and set it on the kitchen counter. That afternoon, I called the Ashworth Development Group's main office and asked about the waterfront project timeline. The receptionist gave me the closing date without hesitation. 9 days away. Conference room on Greenwich Avenue. All parties present. I hung up and looked at the binder on the counter. Brown leather, brass hardware. It looked like what an attorney would carry into a deposition. The Ashworth Development Group occupied 2 floors of a renovated brownstone on Greenwich Avenue. I parked 3 blocks south and fed the meter 2 hours of quarters. The binder sat on the passenger seat. Brown leather, brass zipper. 63 pages behind tabbed dividers. I picked it up and walked. The lobby reception desk was empty. No security guard, no sign-in sheet. A directory placard listed the conference room on the 2nd floor. I took the stairs and saw the room through its glass walls before I reached the door. 14 people and $40 million in equity documents filled the conference room. The mahogany table ran the length of the room, covered in closing documents stacked in signature-ready columns. Hugh sat at the head, walking the table through the construction draw schedule. Constance occupied the chair to his right, reading glasses folded beside her water glass, silver hair drawn back. Meredith sat midway down the near side in a camel blazer, pearl necklace against her collarbone, pen in hand over a signature page. An empty chair to her left held a name placard. Carter Langley. Not present. His seat saved anyway. Gregory Travers sat across from Meredith, steel-rimmed glasses catching the overhead light, pen clicking against the table edge as he organized signature stacks. His paralegal worked beside him, tabbing pages with colored flags. An attorney representing Langley's development group sat near the empty chair with his own documents. The bank had sent 3 people. A woman in a navy suit with a legal pad and the bank's logo on her document binders. The lending counsel. A senior loan officer beside her. A younger attorney from the bank's side, typing on a laptop. The title, Company Representative, a man in wire-rimmed glasses, had title insurance folders spread before him. A notary sat at the far end with her stamp kit and witness log. 3 Ashworth Development Group staff rounded out the table with project binders open. Architectural renderings glowed on the projection screen behind Hugh's chair. 2 residential towers flanking a marina, glass and steel rising from the Stamford waterfront. The Ashworth Development Group logo in the lower right corner. $40 million in construction financing, ready for signatures. I opened the door. Meredith's hand froze over her pen. Hugh stopped mid-sentence. Constance looked at me the way she always did. Like something that didn't belong. Ian. Hugh's voice carried the same weight he used at Sunday dinners. This is a private closing. You shouldn't be here. I walked to the center of the table and set the leather binder on the mahogany between the bank's document stack and Gregory's signature folders. Open to page 47. 8 signatures. All mine. All fake. Before anyone signs, I said, you should see what your equity is built on. Hugh looked at Gregory. Gregory looked at Constance. Constance looked at the lending counsel. The lending counsel studied me for 3 seconds. And you are? Ian Braddock, former husband of Meredith Ashworth Braddock. Before that, 12 years in Deloitte's Forensic Accounting Division, tracing stolen funds through shell company networks. The equity collateralizing your construction loan includes assets taken from my accounts through forged documents. Gregory's pen went still. 5 minutes, the lending counsel said. I turned to the first tab. 18 months ago, 3 joint accounts at First Republic Bank held a combined balance of $1.1 million. Checking, savings, and a brokerage account containing my late father's inheritance. I placed the timeline sheet on the table and turned it toward the lending counsel. 37 outbound transfers reduced that balance to $47,000. Checking and savings were drained in amounts between $2,000 and $8,000, each one kept below automated compliance thresholds. Larger sums moved through the brokerage as advisory fees and capital calls. The money didn't go to advisors. It went somewhere else. I turned to tab 2. 4 Delaware limited liability companies, all formed within the same 18-month window as the account depletion. I laid the 4 formation documents on the mahogany. Ashworth Coastal Holdings, Tidewater Equity Partners, Meridian Capital Ventures, Langley Ashworth Associates. I pointed to the organizing member line on each filing. Same name on all 4, Constance Ashworth. I moved my finger to the registered agent line. Same agent, Hugh Ashworth. Same Wilmington mailing address. A suite leased by the Ashworth family's accountant. Gregory's pen clicked twice against the table edge. He caught himself and pressed it flat. Constance's hands sat on the table. She hadn't moved since I started. Not a finger, not a shift in posture. That kind of control takes effort. These transfers carried my signature, I said. My name appears on every authorization. I turned to tab 3. I didn't sign them. I placed Donna Caldwell's metadata analysis in front of the Lending Council. 8 documents compared in parallel columns. Every signature on every transfer authorization is a digital paste from a single scanned source image. Same resolution on all 8 312 dpi. Identical pixel dimensions. Identical JPEG compression rings at the signature edges. And a color profile mismatch on every document. The pasted signatures run Adobe RGB, while the base documents run sRGB. I turned the comparison matrix so the younger bank attorney could see it. All 8 documents were generated within a 14-minute window on a single afternoon. 1 scan, 8 pastes. Not a single parameter varied between them. Gregory's pen dropped to the table. His fingers opened and let it fall. He didn't reach for it. These aren't disputed signatures, I said. This is a digital template stamped onto bank forms 8 times. The analysis was performed by Donna Caldwell, certified fraud examiner with 14 years of forensic practice. She is prepared to present these findings under oath. The Lending Council pulled the analysis closer. Her eyes moved across the columns. She stopped on the timestamp cluster. You said 14 minutes, she said. Between the first creation time and the last. A real person signing 8 separate bank forms wouldn't produce identical metadata on any of them. These weren't signed. They were manufactured. She set the page down and looked at Hugh. Hugh did not look back. Tab 4. I unfolded the fund tracing spreadsheet across the table. Blue ink lines on white paper, mapping each dollar from its source account through layered corporate transfers to its destination. Every dollar from those 37 transfers, traced forward through the 4 shell entities, lands in the same place, I said. The equity reserves of the Ashworth Development Group's portfolio. The same portfolio listed as collateral for the construction loan on this table. I let the silence hold for 3 seconds. Your collateral includes stolen property, taken through forged documents from accounts bearing my Social Security number. The Lending Council placed her palm flat on the stack of closing documents in front of her. She didn't open them. She covered them. I turned to the last tab, 4 shell companies. The first 3 run identical operating agreements. Constance Ashworth as sole managing member. Standard distribution language. I opened the Langley Ashworth Associates agreement to the Schedule K1 provision. The 4th is different. It names a secondary beneficiary entitled to 20% of all distributed profits. I laid the page on the table and let the name sit. Carter Langley, printed in 12-point type on a Delaware filing, connected by distribution rights to every dollar that had moved through the network. The empty chair beside Meredith held its own weight. Carter Langley, I said, the developer whose anchor tenancy makes this waterfront project viable. Hidden beneficiary in a shell company funded by money stolen from my marriage. Meredith's right hand rose from the table, moved toward her throat, toward the pearls. Her fingers made it halfway and stopped. hung there in the air between the table and her collarbone, suspended in a gesture she couldn't finish. Hugh's face had lost its color. The authority he carried at the head of every table was draining out of him where everyone could watch. Gregory stared at the pen on the mahogany. He did not reach for it. Constance spoke first. Same voice, same pitch. Same cadence she used to tell me when I was holding the wrong fork. "This is a private family matter," she said. "It has no bearing on this closing." I looked at her. 12 years of Sunday dinners. 12 years at the far end of the table. "Not when the collateral is stolen property," I said. "Your bank has a legal obligation to verify the equity chain backing this loan. I've just given them reason to." The lending counsel closed her legal pad. She looked at her colleague, who had stopped typing. Then she looked at Hugh. "This closing is suspended," she said. Nobody moved. "All Ashworth-related accounts held at our institution will be placed under administrative hold pending a full review of the equity documentation and the allegations presented today." "You can't do that." Hugh's voice broke on the third word. "Federal banking regulations require us to investigate credible allegations of fraud in collateralized lending," she said. "Mr. Braddock's presentation meets that threshold." She turned to the title company representative. "I'd recommend you contact your underwriters." The title representative was already gathering his folders. Around the table, the closing collapsed into phone calls. The younger bank attorney stepped into the hallway, cell pressed to his ear. The title representative dialed from his seat, voice low, one hand cupping the mouthpiece. The lending counsel opened her laptop and began typing what I recognized from a dozen Deloitte cases as the opening language of a suspicious activity report. These were the same people who attended Ashworth galas, who shook Hugh's hand at charity dinners, who told Constance how wonderful the wine was, who complimented Meredith on her dress at fundraisers. Now they were calling compliance departments and risk officers because 63 pages of evidence meant every Ashworth transaction in their systems would face federal review. Gregory Travers sat motionless, pen still on the table where he'd dropped it. The family attorney who delivered the $50,000 settlement was staring at his own hands. Constance hadn't moved. Her jaw held, her posture held. But her eyes moved from phone call to phone call, tracking each one the way a chess player watches pieces leave the board. Hugh gripped his armrests. The patriarch who signed what Constance told him to sign and looked the other way when details turned ugly. No direction left to look. I zipped the binder shut and picked it up. Meredith was watching me. Not the documents, not her parents, not Gregory, or the bank attorneys, or the renderings on the screen behind her father's chair. Me. Her hand had come down from where it had frozen in the air. The pearls hung untouched against her collarbone. Her pale blue eyes held no anger, no performance, no rehearsed neutrality. What I saw was something I had never seen in 12 years of marriage. The slow, clear understanding that the man she had placed at the far end of every table, the man who built furniture in a garage, who signed where she pointed, who accepted the wrong fork and the wrong seat and the quiet dismissal of everything he was, had just taken apart her family's empire with a leather binder and 3 weeks of work. She had never understood what a forensic accountant does. She understood now. I walked out of the conference room, down the stairs, through the empty lobby, into the October air on Greenwich Avenue. The sun sat low over the brownstone rooftops, and my truck waited 3 blocks south with an hour and 40 minutes still on the meter. The waterfront deal died before sunset. I learned this from Donna Caldwell, who called at 6:14 that evening while I stood in the shop running my thumb along the Chestnut Guitar's unfinished neck. The bank filed a suspicious activity report with FINCEN within 2 hours of your presentation, she said. Their compliance department flagged every Ashworth-related account in the system. Commercial loans, personal accounts, the development fund. All frozen. How do you know? The lending counsel called me. Wanted to verify my credentials and confirm the metadata analysis independently. She also wants my raw files for the federal referral. Federal referral, FINCEN, doesn't investigate on its own, Ian. They route to FBI financial crimes. This isn't a civil dispute anymore. The forged signatures are multiple felony counts under Connecticut law. Forgery, first degree. Larceny by deception. Conspiracy. I looked through the kitchen window at the butcher paper still covering the cottage wall. Blue ink lines connecting 37 transfers to 4 shells to 1 family name. You need your own attorney, Donna said. Not for the divorce, for the criminal case. You're going to be a material witness. She gave me a name. Margaret Wu, a former federal prosecutor who had handled financial crime cases for the District of Connecticut for 9 years before going into private practice in Stamford. I called her the next morning. Margaret's office occupied the 4th floor of a glass building off Atlantic Street. Clean desk, no banker's boxes, 2 framed diplomas, and a photograph of her shaking hands with a former U.S. attorney. She was 50, sharp-jawed, with the economy of movement that comes from years of courtrooms where every gesture is watched. She reviewed the binder in 40 minutes, read every page, asked 3 questions, made no notes. The settlement is voidable, she said. Connecticut requires full financial disclosure in marital dissolution. If the asset disclosures were materially false, and your evidence says they were, the agreement is void ab initio, as if it never existed. What does that mean for me? The Superior Court will order a full equitable distribution proceeding. You're entitled to your share of the $1.1 million, plus damages for the fraud, plus attorney's fees. And my mother's house? She pulled the home equity loan documentation I'd included. This loan was secured by a representation that joint marital assets exceeding $800,000 backed it. Those assets didn't exist at the time of signing. Meredith misrepresented the collateral to the loan officer, who accepted her documentation without verifying a single number. Margaret set the document down. The bank that made this loan is the same institution with commercial Ashworth accounts now under federal investigation. They'll release the lien before I finish drafting the motion. Trust me on that. I hired her that afternoon. The next 3 weeks moved at 2 speeds. The legal machinery ground forward in conference rooms and filing offices I never entered. The federal investigation expanded outward from the SAR, the way a fund trace expands. Each new entity in the chain exposing the transactions behind it. In Ridgefield, I went back to work. Finished the Westport dining table. Planed a set of cherry cabinet doors. Sharpened tools. Swept sawdust. Built things that held together because someone measured before they cut. Gregory Travers was the first to fall. The Connecticut bar opened a disciplinary investigation within 10 days of the bank's report. 8 notarized documents bearing forged signatures. A notary's legal function is singular. Verify the identity of the person signing. Gregory had stamped each form with his seal and signed his name beside mine, beside a signature that was never mine, certifying under oath that he had witnessed me sign in his presence. He hadn't. I was never in the room. The metadata proved the documents were manufactured in a 14-minute batch on a Tuesday afternoon when I was fitting mortise joints in my shop 40 miles north. His notary stamp placed him at a table where I never sat, on a day I never came, watching a hand that never moved. The bar issued an emergency interim suspension within 3 weeks, pending full review. Criminal accessory charges followed. 2 decades as the Ashworth family's legal fixer, and the same rubber stamp that had made him wealthy made him a defendant. His steel-rimmed glasses and charcoal suits and clicking Mont Blanc pen would be appearing in a very different kind of conference room. Constance was next. Her name sat on every formation document for every shell company in the network. Organizing member. The person who conceived, structured, and directed the entire operation. Forensic investigators have a term for this role. Architect. The strategist who builds the framework while others move the money. In federal fraud cases, the architect draws the longest sentence because the architect made every decision that turned ambition into crime. Margaret called on a Sunday evening. FBI Financial Crimes planned to serve subpoenas on the Ashworth Development Group offices the next morning. I drove to Greenwich at 8:30, parked 2 blocks south of the brownstone on Greenwich Avenue. At 9:15, 2 unmarked sedans pulled to the curb. 4 agents in dark suits walked through the same lobby I'd walked through 2 weeks earlier. Through the second-floor glass walls, I watched them hand documents to Hugh at the conference table. The same table, the same room. He took the papers with both hands. His shoulders didn't drop this time. They locked. Margaret confirmed the agents had also served the Wilmington office suite where all 4 LLCs were registered. Constance's exposure is the worst of anyone's, Margaret said that afternoon. Wire fraud, bank fraud. Conspiracy. The state will bring forgery charges separately. The shell company structure shows premeditation and calculation. This was planned over 18 months. And Hugh? Registered agent on every filing. His signatures on 4 separate LLC formation documents spread across 18 months. The defense he'll want to run, that he didn't know what he was signing, collapses when you have to explain why you signed the same type of document 4 times without once asking what it was for. Hugh had spent decades looking the other way, signing what Constance placed in front of him, maintaining the posture of the patriarch while his wife ran the operation behind the Georgian walls. Plausible deniability was the only principle he'd ever held. It died the same way the waterfront deal died. Under the weight of documents that carried his name, in his handwriting, on pages he could not explain away. Margaret filed the motion to void the divorce settlement on the same day the criminal subpoenas went out. The Connecticut Superior Court reviewed the fraudulent asset disclosures, compared them against the forensic evidence, and set aside the agreement in an 11-page ruling. The legal language took 11 pages. The truth took 1 sentence. They lied about everything. A full equitable distribution proceeding was ordered. My share of the $1.1 million that had been in those accounts before the shell companies were formed, plus compensatory damages, plus attorney's fees. The $50,000 cashier's check went back. Part of the voided settlement. Ruth's house was saved on a Thursday. Margaret sent a single letter to the regional bank holding the $175,000 home equity loan. 3 pages. The first outlined the misrepresentation of collateral. The second detailed the bank's own exposure for failing to verify Meredith's asset documentation against any independent source. The third noted that the bank maintained commercial accounts with the Ashworth Development Group, accounts now under federal investigation for receiving funds traceable to forged transfer documents. The bank's general counsel called Margaret within 4 hours. The lien was released the following week. No litigation, no negotiation, no back and forth. The bank wanted distance from the Ashworth name more than it wanted $175,000. I drove to Ridgefield that evening. Cold November air came through the kitchen window she kept cracked year-round, carrying the smell of wet leaves from the yard. Sat at Ruth's kitchen table while she poured coffee into the same 2 mugs she'd used for 30 years. The same table where Meredith had spread the loan documents. The same chair where my mother had signed away her home on the word of a woman she trusted. "It's done," I told her. "The lien is released. The house is clear." Ruth set her cup down. Her hands shook, the arthritis worse in cold weather. Her voice held steady. "Your father would have handled it the same way," she said. Quiet and right. We sat until the porch light came on. I didn't tell her about the federal investigation, the criminal charges, the voided settlement. She didn't need the details. She needed the house. She had it. The brass key was still on her ring. The Ashworth name collapsed in the same rooms where it had been built. Greenwich runs on reputation. 3 generations of deals, donations, and club memberships had made the family a fixture of every charity board and country club roster in Fairfield County. The same network that had propped them up now processed their destruction with the same efficiency it processed everything else. Invitations stopped arriving. Board seats were reassigned without announcement. The annual Ashworth Foundation Gala, scheduled for December, was canceled when no venue would host it. Carter Langley's name surfaced in the federal filings 2 weeks after the closing collapsed. The 20% beneficiary provision in Langley Ashworth Associates connected him to every stolen dollar that had flowed through the fourth shell entity. His development company lost its lending relationships within days. The anchor tenancy agreement, the deal that had made him valuable to the Ashworths and to Meredith, became evidence in a fraud prosecution. Margaret heard he'd left the state. Meredith had moved out of the Greenwich estate. The architectural renderings came down from the ADG lobby on a Tuesday. 2 glass and steel towers that would never break ground, removed from the walls by staff already updating their resumes. Meredith called twice in the weeks that followed. The first call came on a Sunday evening. I was oiling the Chestnut Guitar's bracing, working the finish into grain that had been waiting 130 years. Her name lit the screen. I watched it ring 6 times and go to voicemail. She left nothing. The second call came 4 days later. This time, she left a message. I listened to it once. "Ian, I need to talk to you, not about the legal situation. I just need you to understand that I didn't." 3 seconds of dead air. I don't expect you to believe me. She was right. I deleted the message and set the phone on the workbench. 63 pages of evidence had said everything that needed saying. Bank records don't negotiate. Metadata doesn't accept apologies. Transfer documents don't care whether the person who forged them had second thoughts afterward. The Ashworths' mistake was never the greed. Greed is ordinary. The courts process it every week. Their mistake was the condescension. 12 years of Sunday dinners at the far end of the table. 12 years of a man who builds tables. 12 years of looking through me as though I were one of my own pieces of furniture, something functional and forgettable, taking up space until something better came along. The quiet man at the end of the table, the one who signed where they pointed and held the wrong fork and accepted the chair nobody wanted. They never bothered to learn what he did for a living. Still invested? Hit like and rate my story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Tell me why. I read them all. A year later, clear autumn morning. October light through the shop windows, catching the sawdust suspended in the air. I stood at the center bench with the Chestnut Guitar in my hands. The body was finished. Sides bent and joined, top and back plates fitted, bracing carved and glued. The fretboard was inlaid now, mother-of-pearl position markers set into wood that had been growing when Grover Cleveland was president. The neck was fitted and trued, the tuning machines installed, the bridge glued and clamped and released. 8 months of work on wood that couldn't be replaced. Only the final sanding remained. I ran my hand along the back of the neck. The grain ran about 12 degrees off-center, a natural twist in the wood that most builders would have corrected with a heavier cut. I'd followed it instead. Let the chestnut tell me where the curve belonged. The neck sat in my palm the way a handshake fits. Not forced, not adjusted. Right. Ruth's house was safe. The lien discharged. The title clean. The brass key still on her ring. I'd driven past last Sunday. The wraparound porch my father framed stood solid under the weight of 40 Connecticut winters. The kitchen window was open. Coffee smell carried across the yard. She poured coffee at her kitchen table and talked about the hydrangeas along the south wall and the neighbor's new dog and whether I was eating enough. The Ashworths never came up, not once. The house didn't need explanations. It needed someone to look after it. She had that handled. I picked up the 220 grit sandpaper and started on the neck. Long strokes following the grain, letting the paper do the work. My father's voice in the motion. Too fast, slow down. Let your hand listen. The shop smelled of walnut oil and chestnut dust. A cardinal called from the hedge outside the open door. Client work lined the walls. A hall table in white oak, 2 nightstands in cherry, a commission for matching bookshelves that would take me into December. 4 finished guitars stood in their floor stands along the back wall. Maple, walnut, ash, rosewood. The chestnut would be the 5th. I'd string it next week. Tune it. Play 3 chords badly. G, C, D, campfire strumming on an instrument built from wood that had survived a century of rot and blight and demolition. I turned the guitar in the light. The grain caught the morning sun, and for a moment the surface showed its full history. Growth rings from years before the blight, nail holes from the barn framing, a saw mark from whoever had salvaged it decades ago. My father used to say the house doesn't care who built it, only whether the foundation is level. I set the sandpaper down and ran my thumb across the neck one more time. The grain ran where it wanted. I'd followed.